All right, here we go. It is the System Failure Podcast, number 28. How's it going, Nate?
Good. I am delighted to be back in studio. I barely remember last week's podcast. I had been up all night driving the car, and I definitely felt punchy during the last episode. So, obviously I'm not in the car like I was 2 episodes ago, so it's always good to be in person in the studio with you, Brian. So I'm delighted to be here. I do have a lot of road trips this week, but I'm just happy to be in between those road trips. So, awesome to be in studio. How about you? How is your week shaping up?
It's going okay. It's like the 11-year anniversary of me working at my job that I can't stand. So I'm having like an existential crisis.
Yeah. Why number 11? I would think the big 10-0 would be the real sticking point.
Well, I had an existential crisis at the 10-year anniversary.
Okay, too. I see. So this is becoming an annual ritual at this point.
Yeah. And I don't mind working. I just don't want to do something that feels pointless. And I guess without going in too much into the nitty gritty. See, you quit your job and went on a tour of like Africa and Europe and whatnot.
Yes, I did. It worked out great. I think, so in 2021, I abandoned my, I too was stuck at a job for 10 years. Now, the people that ran that company that I worked for were great people. And, I really admired them, but I really hated the job. I just didn't know. I just needed a job, and so I just took the job that offered the most salary that would hire me in the summer of 2010 after moving home to Maine from Florida. And then I was there all the way up through 2020 through the COVID era. And then I got a tech job, which I thought would be much more like of a job that I would have wanted. It's like a cool job, being a software developer too. But it was like working from home, and I don't know, me and Tracy, my lovely fiance, decided that it would be worthwhile, that we should, there's no time like the present to go traveling. During the COVID era, it was it was a difficult time for traveling in the sense that there was a lot of paperwork and, pandemic related hoops you had to jump through when traveling, and you had to wear a mask on the flight and in the airports. And so that meant, like 30 hours of masking at a stretch without any relief, which was kind of brutal. I will always have grooves in my ears, in the cartilage of my ears, from wearing those masks for just like insanely long periods of time, like cheap, crappy masks with the elastic, But it all worked out pretty well in the end, with the caveat that like Trace and I don't own a house, so like and now that interest rates have gone back up, and now that we have fully blown out housing prices to where 2 incomes can afford it, we're not really sure what's going to happen. We may just have to go back out to the world and go to one of these locations where finance hasn't, the structure of finance hasn't demolished the housing market. But I don't know. I didn't quit my job. I think I didn't know how else I would pay my $1,200 a month in student loan debt. So I didn't quit it for 10 years because I was afraid of what would happen. But it all kind of worked out. So you probably are more free than you perceive, I guess. I think I was ultimately.
I got a degree like in political science, right, which is pretty useless. And so I got into basically working for an insurance company, which has been fine, but like in the post-COVID world, just like insurance is like terrible because like the cost of everything has gone up and there's no labor, and the logistics of everything insurance related is crazy, and you can just expect your insurance premiums to be increasing annually every year for a long time while they catch up to what actually happened during the COVID. It's truly shocking. And so I don't know, I guess I was pretty much more okay with doing what I was doing pre-COVID. And now post-COVID, it's brutal. Now, I know you have these like accounting skills, which seem like a good way to get back into the economy if you've left it. And I don't know, this Pink Floyd cover band came to the Mayer Auditorium recently here in Portland. And, I am into like music and production, and I did pay for like the VIP experience where you talk to the people. And I was asking them jokingly if I could quit my job and go on tour with them. But, what I got to do is like hone my pitch and catch them next time they come around.
So you like casually or jokingly alluded to this notion that you might abandon your job and run away and join the circus, join this Pink Floyd cover band, and it wasn't just met with awkward silence. You're saying?
Yeah, the guy was like, "Well, what can you do?"
Yeah,
I was like, "Well, I sit around and practice the guitar solos, but I didn't really think to get into like how I produce this podcast, do editing and whatnot." And so I think if I just was more serious about it and padded out my resume, I think they probably do need people to make this happen.
I do think that there's got to be, to these bands that tour, right, there's got to be an aspect of this that is like the circus or like joining the gypsies, where there's a role in society for some people need to have their deck shuffled, and there's a role in society for that. I think that or like another example might be if you work for the production truck at ESPN's Monday Night Football, or is it now ABC that does Monday Night Football? I can't.
ESPN.
Oh yeah, yes. Well, that's the same thing. But yeah, ESPN's done it forever. But like if you joined the production crew of ESPN and just drove around the country all football season, you probably would. I'm sure that it's not gonna like pay you enough to have a home or a family. You'll get like a berth on some kind of a trailer, right? That's probably how the carnival works. But it's a culture all in its own, so I don't know. Maybe it's not such a crazy idea. Maybe that's just something that they expect you. Like people get on and get off like a train on a tour that goes around the country like that. Wouldn't you reckon? You know more about music than I do, so that's kind of how I perceive it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I don't want to bitch about the system. Maybe that's what we do or what you do on this podcast.
We did go and label the pod system failure. That is right there at the top.
I do think the self-determination is key. And to some extent, doing the podcast, raising people's awareness about, like class awareness is some kind of self-determination. But I think you can't just sit around and like hope for someone else to solve your problems. So.
Agreed. So we do talk a lot about the specific ways in which the structure of the system is failing. But I think all the big lesson here is that, so you're going to talk later about Michael Malice and JBP in their discussion about communism. And so much of the discussion around communism is like just hobbled and totally hopeless because no one really knows what communism means. And so I do think that like spreading awareness or being able to see the ways in which the system is failing specifically, that's how you find opportunities in a failing system. And that's how you, like, we shouldn't, like, the failure of a system, it has the word failure in it, but it's not a bad thing. We should never be sad about failing. So, right? That's what progress looks like. I mean, this should be it'll be harrowing in the sense that we can't exactly predict what's coming next, right? Times of great change are unpredictable, but it's always going to be good, right? It's never going to be ultimately bad in the long run. I mean, even the worst chapters of history we can learn from and build on. So I don't know. So yeah, it's a complex question philosophically, but it's an even more complex question like mechanically on how do you get out of like your job has all of this gravity and all of this inertia to it. Like, how do you get out of that lane into another one? It's a tough jump to make, or at least I found it to be for those 10 years when I felt stuck in my job.
I think I gotta like make it like my active mission to like quit my job.
Yeah,
and I have to like put more effort into this. Like, I think you gotta not do things that are stupid. And there's a lot of traps in like eating like fast food. That kind of thing is like stupid, right?
Oh yeah,
and it's just so easy to do. There's so many things that are so easy to do and that are just so stupid. But yeah, I do want to segue into this JVP.
Okay, yeah, let's get into it.
I mean, it is kind of a fitting thing.
No, I've not heard this pod, so I'm flying blind here. I did listen to this man James Lindsay, who was recently on the JRE. He's been on the JRE before. One of these guys who. He'll just start talking about the present state of affairs and lamenting it from a more conservative position, but just total confusion from the 1950s about what the definition of communism actually is. Now, I propose for the purposes of this hallowed podcast a working definition of communism that's nothing more than public oversight over the means of production, things like factories and the provision of goods and services. So, like that, isn't that worker-owned means of production? I think that's that's the most basic definition of communism there is. So, I wonder, Brian, what are your thoughts on JBP and Michael Malice? What working definitions of communism did they go with? What's the report?
Man, I don't think they get out there and establish one, but there is this problem. Like, does worker-owned means of production mean like owned by the government, or does it mean like owned by the people? Yeah. And there's like a kind of a those aren't necessarily the same thing, right? And that's the whole problem.
Yeah. So, like, Leninism is like definitely the government the government's just gonna send a commissar and we'll fire we'll remove the CEO, remove the board of directors, and just install a government commissar. A lot of problems with that. That is obviously a system ripe for abuse. But that's just one interpretation of communism. I think that the word was socialism for a long time, and socialism, I think, is a very similar idea in the sense that that's just reform from within the system. Right? We're going to gradually change the system into a more socialist, like into one of these socialist societies. But communism is specifically about revolution, like topple the existing government. Historically that's when the word communism started getting bandied. But when like Leninism came around, and it was like in the Soviets were the Russians were successful in establishing the Soviet Union. But so sorry, you were asking a specific question about whether or not it's people or the government owning the means of production, but it's really the workers owning the means of production, I think, is the most basic, most oldest definition of this Marxist idea.
Well, that's certainly what the thing that you would want. Well, they were on the podcast. They were talking about like the government run like cafeterias or whatever, and the government's in charge of bringing the people the food under like Stalinist Russia here.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how it's just so easy for the government if you've been like a dissident or something, they don't have to feed you. And then if people like aren't incentivized to go out there, financially incentivized to go out there and like grow this food and bring it to you so you can eat it somehow, it's just so easy for that system to be disrupted.
Yeah.
Which I can totally agree with.
So now we're getting into lumping in this notion of the market as if that is part of the capital. Capitalism means that our factories that produce food, or the waterworks or the electric works or what have you, are like traded as if they themselves are commodities to the highest bidder, and the profits are the reward that the investor gets. Right? That's capitalism. Now you could have a command economy, right, where like you could have a capitalist structure. We are talking only about the ownership structure of the massive means of production, right? So if we start you could have worker co-ops selling products on a market, right? So the free market is a totally separate concept. That's completely unrelated from capitalism versus socialism. And the capitalists are often guilty of claiming the good things the market does as if that's part of as if those are feathers in the cap of capitalism. It ain't true, right? The market's again, you could have worker co-ops, but their products are just like the market is a means of distribution. It is not a structure of ownership. So we are talking the problem that plagues America, that our media will do anything to avoid having us talk about, including fomenting race relations and crazy LGBTQ endless arguments, circular arguments with definitions of what is a woman. All of that is a sideshow to distract anyone from realizing that the thing that's killing us is the specific way that our corporations are structured, the ownership of our corporations are structured. Or said another way, it's whose hand is on the ship's wheel. Because the only hand on the ship's wheel are the bean counters, and that's causing a huge problem. We are prioritizing profit above all other factors in the production process. And profit is important. Obviously, a democratically run corporation would still include profit in its decision making. People need to be incentivized to work, as you observed mere moments ago. But having profit be the sole incidence of decision making is killing us, right? That's what gets you to move all of your factories to China voluntarily. We voluntarily that is just from a military history of military, like I'm from a military history perspective, deindustrializing your own country and then is a horrible mistake, but then compounding it by reassembling that industrial capacity inside the borders of your chief economic rival is a tactical blunder so stupid that there's no comparison in all of history. Why are we doing that? It's because of the way that our corporations are shaped. We just got to alter that shape a little bit, and we will find ourselves in a much. There are problems with the market, but I think that we've got to first deal with the ownership shape of our corporations, and then deal with the market, right? If there's like a shortage of milk, well, the rich old lady's going to buy the milk and feed her cats while human babies starve. And so, the market doesn't really ask how you got the money; it just allocates goods and services according to who has the most money. So there's some issues with the market need to be tweaked, but I think we can all agree to keep the market and just affect the ownership structure. That is what communism or Marxism is all about, in my view. But I would like to give me JBP and Michael Malice. There's so much confusion over this very simple proposition that we can never really get that conversation started. But what did Malice and Peterson, what was their, having not heard the pod, I'd love to hear. I'm sure that they congratulate each other on being who could, it was a race on who could denigrate the notion of communism first and lament Marxism and its equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity sort of context. But what you got for us?
Well, so it's interesting because like Michael Malice and Jordan Peterson are obviously both these right-leaning figures, and like Jordan Peterson is being attacked by the Canadian government for having his opinion on like the transgender situation or whatever, and so. Well, there's all these problems with current society that are obviously, I guess Jordan Peterson and Michael Malice would have to say that they are a problem of cultural Marxism rather than like a problem generated by, I guess, our capitalist system or whatever you want to call this, whatever we've got going on here in the West. Like we have the capitalist system. And I guess they would just say that cultural Marxist ideas have somehow worked their way into our society, rather than being a problem of capitalism, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that cultural Marxism is a problem generated by capitalism, right? It's more like this is a distraction trotted out by our capitalist overlords so that no one thinks about the problems of the capitalism that we're plagued with. Like,
well, that kind of is a problem with capitalism, that the capitalists need to like keep making money, so they have to trot out this cultural Marxism as a distraction.
Okay, yeah.
And well, mostly when I think about the problems of capitalism, I mean the COVID's like such a great case in point, right? Because there's all this shutdown of the economy, there's all these like anti-capitalist measures, and I mean, it's either a conspiracy by the capitalists to destroy like small business and make it so that you have to buy from Amazon, and to make it easier for the government to control like how you spend your money. Like, I mean, the like trucker protests, right? If you like sent money to the trucker protests, like you got like your bank account shut down and stuff, or whatever the situation was.
I think there's two things here. There's the thing where, like, 9/11 happens, and this whole list of provisions become that already exist. This whole wish list that already exists becomes the Patriot Act, right? So I think a similar thing happened with COVID. Like, this whole list of things that they wanted to do, like what you're talking about, take away, like, just cut off people's access to a bank account because they supported the Canadian trucker protest. So I think there was that, but then there was also like, how can we really crush our competition? The small business, the mom and pop restaurants, the little hardware store, and just make it Walmart and Amazon and like Best Buy and Target, and that's it, and then your major grocery chains, and then these are the only people doing business anymore, or those six firms are like 80% of all the commerce that goes on in the U.S. So I think there's at least two sort of things lurking behind the COVID curtain, at least two, probably more, right? But these are things generate, like, to your point, like businesses need to sell us ever more wares each year to satisfy their shareholders, and then there's also there's a problem looming, and that is that collectively workers haven't been paid enough to buy the products they produce from the capitalists who own the means of production. Like, in other words, there's been a gap between how much capitalists wanted to have paid out to their workers and how much products they've sold us on the other hand. And that gap, of course, is everyone's debt: auto debt, mortgage debt, student loan debt, and credit card debt. And that is a festering sore. So I think that clamping down on control and what people can like I think they can see that they are in a system that can't propagate itself into the future, and so want to clamp down and get as much control as they can at every opportunity they can. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's why like Bitcoin is just like guaranteed to be a winner, and it's like what Brett Weinstein was talking about with Tucker there, and it's about the control. It's not about like making money anymore.
Yeah. Same with the TikTok ban, right? I'm like, yeah, that's obviously they don't mind manipulation and data mining and harvesting. They just want it to be them that does it and not the Chinese.
So I guess the system's come back around because that like Michael Malice and Jordan Peterson are out on Joe Biden, who is left leaning, although he really is like a crazy. Well, just Joe Biden's like a product of like George Bush leading into Obama, leading into the Donald, I mean that's like what the system. It's like the logical conclusion of the system that we've had in place. Anyway, I mean, in the spirit of like self-determinism, what you have to do is like not be stupid and take control of what you can, which is how we got into this whole topic in the first place. And Well, that's why we have to make this very podcast.
Yeah.
And spread ideas about class awareness and whatnot.
Yeah, if you want to navigate a collapsing civilization, you need to know exactly how it's collapsing. Like if you want to survive the Titanic, it's good to know where the gash from the iceberg is, and when the lifeboats are leaving and what's likely to happen. Right?
I guess that the thing about the Michael Malice and Jordan Peterson pod is that the lesson is that communism is bad, okay, and capitalism is good, okay, but really, the lessons have to be about keeping your guard up for nonsense, and that's why it's important to not eat fast food, not buy into COVID hysteria, and I guess in retrospectively, people say that the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were crazy, but people are still falling for this business in the Ukraine, and somehow the jury's out on that still.
Yeah. Every war has been a complete disaster from since World War II, and we just cannot see. We just how many times do we have to learn this lesson? But you're right. That's the thing, right? You listen to the insane rantings of the COVID regime with a critical ear, but also listen to JVP and Malice with a critical ear, right? And be on the balls of your feet, and just aware versus rock back on your heels and complacent. Yeah, that's definitely that's no way to survive a Titanic wreck, is being complacent and back on your heels.
Yeah. Well, calling political systems bad is crazy. Just communism itself, it's just this political tool for how you're gonna handle the means of production and whatnot. And obviously capitalism is rife with its own issues as well, just as what we're learning here. And so I think that Jordan Peterson and Michael Malice could definitely do with having their class awareness raised.
Yeah. So they went on about the evils of communism, but did they ever talk about? Were they ever well, here's the evils? Look, Stalin is a dude whose list of crimes is his bill of indictment. He has a fearsome bill of indictment. He has a lot to answer for. But I know one Russian I used to work with, Mariana, she used to say that her grandfather would always say everyone knows Stalin times were the best times. And you're wow, even after the bungling of the collectivization of agriculture in the Ukraine and all the political assassinations and paranoia, in all the millions of bodies, really, Stalin times were the best times. But that's what she said. They don't stack up the successes of communism, Soviet communism, industrializing basically a medieval kingdom in a single generation, stomping our ass in the space race, things like that. They don't the increasing quality of life for the people of the Soviet Union in the first, in the middle part of the 20th century. None of the successes are mentioned. I'm assuming, right? None of the big things that communism accomplished. So it's just not. It's if you want to evaluate the neighbors, you have to, you talk to the neighbor on one side who likes them, but you also talk to the other one on the other side that doesn't like them, or you have to make some kind of a balanced judgment, right?
Really, you should do like Tucker and go to Russia and try to assess the situation and see what is good about it. It's hard to imagine people think the Stalin times are the best times, but on the other hand,
if you're an ethnic Russian living in Moscow, maybe it is, or maybe that, and maybe it was. There was a giant increase in the amount of nutrition that people were. There's a bunch of metrics that show how well the Russians were doing around the mid-century.
I guess if you think about America today, if you're out in the trailer park or whatever, and that's a lot of people, that's a really destitute situation, especially in the post-COVID world. Yeah. And I guess in the cities, it's okay if you're not one of the many homeless out on the streets. Yeah. I guess times seem pretty rough. Can you imagine what it would be like to have kids? And have to buy they need 10 pairs of shoes and stuff, and you'd have to make so much money to reasonably afford your kid to be able to do things to have the kind of life you'd want them to have. It would cost so much money. And
what's the lyric from Eminem? Trying to feed and water my seed, plus teeter totter, caught up being a prima donna. Oh, something about food stamp. These goddamn food stamps don't buy diapers. Yeah, it's got to be nuts, dude. It's got to be wild. That's why that Eminem music was the anthem of our generation. It was, that's got to be an insane situation. Trailer park.
Yeah, I just hate the idea of sending my kid to school and having them be one of the poor kids. Although I think I have a bit of a complex from being sent to Hebron Academy and being one of the poor kids.
Yeah, maybe it ain't so bad if you don't make a big deal about it. But yeah, I mean, I definitely wore funky clothes in middle school, and this is a time when you're really trying to, you've like learned hopefully how to impress your parents, and now you have to take the next step, learn how to impress your peers and how to get on with your peers and be successful with your peers. And it's tough to do when you're, wearing comical clothes or hand-me-downs, or, that's a tough age to be the po kid. But maybe it builds character too. You can end up spinning a pretty decent podcast later in life, as a result of your trial. Like being a stand-up comic, right? None of these stand-up comics had like easy childhoods. They all had screwed up childhoods, but that gives them the sort of artistic, like what artist is not miserable in some way, right? Like Beethoven. I mean, it's like, Beethoven's a man who lost his hearing. He was like obsessed with music, but then lost his ability to hear music. That's got to be a tough row to hoe, man. I can't imagine. Sawing the legs off your piano, put it on the ground so you can at least feel the vibrations from it.
Well, I guess you need like the right level of torment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like with professional athletes, they don't like kids these days. They don't like scream at them like they used to. Like back in the day. And people are like flowers, right? You give them like nutrients and sunlight, and they'll grow into a big, beautiful flower. And then if you like traumatize them and stuff, they'll wilt and not look so good. And so I mean, you don't want your kids to be soft, but on the other hand, I don't know about like if all this torment and whatnot is needed. So I guess I have mixed feelings about that.
Well, amenable. There's so much torment that it just suffocates you. You never see the light of day. And then there's just the right amount of torment to season a rock opera like the 1979's The Wall, for example. So yeah, I mean, that's a kind of depends on each individual person what kind of load they should be bearing. But it's the worst when you've got too big of a load and you can't find a way to move it along. And that's that's like your brain will like flash distress signals nonstop all day every day if that's the case. And then that's not good for your like physical body nor your mental mind. That's a bad place to be.
I think that is like the collective experience of today's youth who have been driven crazy by social media and I guess mostly the social media and general fabric of our society being torn asunder by our capitalist overlords.
Okay. But don't we think social media has all kinds of potential for good? Like I reckon, now it is true that social media, they're a constellation of apps that have been honed through mass data collection to be as addictive as possible. But that's kind of another example of the profit motive polluting peeing in every pool it gets into. But couldn't social media isn't the degradation on social media a reflection of a deteriorated condition and that the deteriorating condition is really a highly relatable experience of being having to do a pointless job. And it like if you do a pointless job but it pays for this lavish lifestyle that you love, that's one thing. But if you work a pointless job but you're never going to be able to own a home, then that's really a recipe for, well, that's why I think your anecdote at the top of the pod would be highly, highly relatable to a great number of people. I think that's the experience that like most people in America are having these days is, working a job because you have to eat, but that job's never going to get you into a house. So it's like, why, what am I doing here? I'm just a conduit between my bill collectors and my work, and it's not really getting me anywhere. There are too many toll booths. People have set up too many toll booths on the routes we have to travel in life, and it's just we're going to have a reform or a revolution to shake those fleas off so that we can get back to leading productive lives or something like that.
Well, I mean, they say that like TikTok like encourages kids in China to study as opposed to I don't have girls shake their booty or whatever happens here on TikTok. I don't know how true that is. It seems plausible. I mean, obviously, I think the potential certainly lies within social media to do good things. Probably, like, just how would you make that change happen, though? Like, probably we need to stop collectively using TikTok, or maybe we could make our own. If we need, like, the Firefox of TikTok, although no one uses Firefox anymore, and people probably don't even know what it is.
We should use Firefox. We should all get Apple computers and run like the Brave browser or one of these. We should all stop using the Google products. But for all business, I guess I would propose a 3-tier wedding cake where you have the lowest tier is new startups that are all capitalist. Capitalism has a lot of good things. Like we got to not be like Malice and JBP and admit that capitalism has some very dynamic qualities to it. that have borne it aloft these past 600 years. And I think the lowest tier of the cake's got to be the regular capitalist businesses. Then you got your middle tier where you got worker-owned means of production. Then a top tier that's a public utility. Like, I feel like Google should be a public utility. What do you think, Brian? I mean, we don't want multiple Google search bars. We just want the one Google search bar that everyone goes to, right? So it's like kind of a natural monopoly, and so it probably doesn't make sense to have it be privately owned. It just ends up being an extraction. Too much control to give one body or organ like the Google Corporation. What do you think?
Well, I mean, Google, appears to be like this DARPA-funded project, so really it should be publicly owned.
Yeah, we already paid. Yeah, it's like the vaccine, all the research publicly funded, all the profits privatized. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd be down for public ownership. I don't know how you make that kind of thing happen.
Yeah. Well, it will take. It's going to take the conscious. It's going to take the consciousness of a majority of voters in a democratic system to bring that kind of isn't that the idealistic answer? And so we have to spread. We have to say okay, Peterson and Malice. It's okay to look under the hood of communism, and it's okay to dispassionately compare the weaknesses and the strengths of that system versus the one we live in, and then maybe some hybrid result is the best way forward. But yeah, I think it's going to take. People are going to have to start thinking in terms of class, which is a big black hole in all of our American sort of model of the reality we live in. People are going to have to start thinking in terms of class, so that because only once you identify the problem can a solution be universally agreed upon. And I think some solution like that one's going to be the most sensible one. There's the scrappy startup, but then when the person who started the business wants to sell it, he has to first offer it, or she has to first offer it to their workers, and the workers can get a loan to buy out the original owner. And then at some point, the government's going to have to hit them with the natural monopoly stamp and say, yeah, sorry, you can't turn a profit on people's internet access or their access to water or air or sunshine or those things are just going to have to be provided at cost on an economy of scale, and that's the most obvious, sensible way forward. So yeah, I think a lot of podcasts with a lot of yakking and nonsense on them is just what the doctor ordered to raise class consciousness and to get us to the point where we can we can at least draw a chalk outline on the sidewalk and identify the nature of the problem, and then solve it from there. So yeah, that's what I think.
I think a big part of the solution. If COVID is any omen, it just people need to stop drinking so much Mountain Dew, right, and be healthier and strong and fit. And we have a glaring weakness as a society in that we've all been we're a bunch of swine at the pig farm, and we're loaded up with all these injections and eating terrible food, and it's easy pickings for our reptilian overlords to come to the harvest.
Yeah, stronger individuals definitely would be a thing. Do you remember the Simpsons episode where the Simpsons family sitting on the couch and Bart's like, if only there was some long, thin, table we could all just eat off of versus having these TV trays. And Marge's like, you're talking about a trough. We're not getting a trough. But yeah, man, the food is poisoned, as you indicated. And that's another problem with prioritizing factor above all other possible parameters. Because they're the whole plan is to give you as little nutrition, as little value back for your dollar as possible. And so we have food that's RFK has a bunch of stats that he reads off in his stump speech about how much less nutritious the food is in 2024 versus 1970. It's shocking. I can't remember any of his stats, and I want to find out where he got them. But you need 12 bananas to get the nutrition that you would have gotten from one banana in 1975, right? And you remember his stump speech with his bullet points to this effect?
Yeah.
And so you're right, man. The food is poisoned, and social media is deformed beyond recognition and is now predatory versus instead of facilitating, happy relationships, it's, trying to capture as much of our attention as we can and ram ads down our throat till we choke on it. And we're outsourcing our factories to our strategic, rivals. The decisions being made by the corporate bodies are just ruinous decision one after another, and at some point we got to put the brakes on that train and say, okay, we're going to need another rationale for making decisions here, and not that profit isn't important, it's just not the only thing that's important. So let's try to make some more some decisions that factor in more parameters than just that one. And the only way to do that is to change the shape of corporations. At least that's what I think. But maybe my mind has been befuddled by the cultural Marxism boogeyman so feared by Malice and Peterson.
I mean, just the biggest thing is that our reptilian overlords have an ability to cause like a 9/11 style event where everyone collectively loses their mind, and then they can just ram through whatever they want for a little while. And that's like staying strong through that kind of situation is like a real problem. And
that's got to be the big lesson of COVID right there, eh? It was really easy to get swept up in the hysteria.
I feel like I'm 2-0, through 9/11 and COVID for keeping my head on level shoulders.
Not me. I was excited about the invasion of Afghanistan in the early goings of 2002 and late 2001. I thought I just believed what the TV was telling me, and I was like, yeah. We'll send in the Air Force and level the Taliban. That's going to be seems like a proportional response to 9/11. But the interval between 2000 and 2010 was a big eye opener for me as far as the wisdom of invading other countries, no matter what acts of terrorism are committed here, by Saudis, Saudi Wahhabists, right? That's who committed 9/11. So we're gonna level Afghanistan. I can't believe I fell for that.
Well, we're all going to lose our sanity for like a little bit. The key is just to get back on the bike and pick ourselves up when inevitably they come for us again.
Dan Carlin always, the greatest podcaster out there, Dan Carlin always calls for a legislative moratorium in the aftermath of terrorist attacks. Of course, that's never going to get passed on Capitol Hill because the aftermath of terrorist attacks is prime. That's when it's harvest time for the folks on Capitol Hill.
Well, that get rid of the whole reason for terrorist attacks.
Yeah. That would get rid of the whole reason for terrorist attacks. Well, you're right, yeah. But a legislative moratorium, you just got to wait for that battleship to roll back on its keel after it takes a hit before you start making decisions and start pushing buttons and yanking levers. But yeah, that's right. But fertile ground is. But you're right. Terrorist attacks are fertile ground for legislation that can make our legislators rich.
All right, well, what else do we want to get into here?
Well, how are we doing on time? We're
40 minutes.
40 minutes? Okay, good. That leaves me enough time to talk about... now, I already brought up the Titanic and used that example of hitting an iceberg, but I have this idea I've been kicking around. I think I'll write up an essay on it. And I'll try not to elucidate this whole idea in one big block, like one big word salad here. But I think that... is it your sense, Brian, that Christianity and Neoplatonism are related? Like, the earliest Christians lived in Alexandria next to these Neoplatonists, like the Gnostic Christians. There was a lot of cross-pollination between the ideas. Or maybe the idea of a higher realm and that's hidden from this world, or a kingdom of heaven is something that you can sort of see where the Christian idea comes from the Platonic idea.
Well, in the Republic, Socrates is talking about like the light, or at least in one of those writings about Socrates. Maybe it's the account of like it as death or whatever.
Yeah.
But he's just talking about how he knows there's the light and he knows when he's following it.
That's the trial of Socrates. Yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
And that kind of thing does sound Christian.
Yeah.
So, I mean, probably, almost certainly. On
the stand, Socrates is talking about his inner daemon or oracle that tells him when something is right or wrong. He has a sort of, he calls it that's what they had, an oracle is the comparison he used. There's this whole raft of Platonic philosophy that kind of got mixed in with the Jewish debt forgiveness tradition in Judea, shaken out a martini shaker and poured out into martini glasses as Christianity. That's basically... Well, there's also the sun worship that's mixed in there too, and the psychedelic cults. So all of these elements are what make up Christianity. And then, of course, Neoplatonism resurfaces in the Middle Ages as magic, right? Wizards and burning witches and whatnot, and alchemists. The ideas of a book like the Corpus Hermeticum come from second century Alexandria, written by Neoplatonists, and then circulated through Europe and during the Renaissance is like an example of ancient wisdom, right? There's Neoplatonism in the guise of magic in the Renaissance sense. So I think it's true to say, in other words, the headline here is I think that our Titanic has hit the iceberg of Neoplatonism in just the way that medieval society hit the iceberg of Neoplatonism and Roman society hit the iceberg of Neoplatonism. Things that in where the ship here is the metaphor is like the leadership structure of society, like Neoplatonism. When the leaders of society get way out over their skis in terms of control, in terms of the ethics and the way that they shape and rule society, in terms of the outcomes of in terms of society not creating too many losers, like eventually those societies become corrupt, and when that happens, the realization that our 4D matrix that we live inside is a reflection of a higher order reality, in the way that your shadow on the sidewalk is a reflection of a higher 3D reality. And that's Plato's allegory of the cave, right? He uses shadows on the flickering on the wall of a cave is literally to elucidate this point. And so, like, if that's true, like if it's happening again, what would it look like? And I think you've heard Eric Weinstein's whole thing about science being the seed corn of capitalism, right? That's a rant you maybe have heard. It's available on YouTube. It's one of his constant bailiwicks he's going on about. But the idea is that science creates technology, entrepreneurs bring the technology to market, and then the part I tack on is by borrowing money from banks. So there's this weird connection between banks and science, and these are the people that are at the pinnacle of our pyramid, the last 600 years of the capitalist pyramid, like the last 600 years of the modern economy divided between employers and employees that replaced the medieval economy of peasants and lords, and which replaced the Roman economy of slaves and masters. So if it looks like, I feel like if the ship of science has crashed into this iceberg of Neoplatonism, right? I feel like a few boxes fell off their truck, like the truck of science like rolls through town, and a few crates fall off the truck, and we, the regular normies, get to pick up and dust off a few of these crates and be like, what's this? The placebo effect? What's that? The double slit experiment? Like, what's going on here? To what extent are we generating the reality we live in versus just living in it? And I think science may have stumbled upon the Copenhagen interpretation of the quantum mechanics, where this is like Erwin Schrödinger's cat in the box. Is the cat alive or dead inside the box?
Yeah. So obviously, there's a thing going on right now where, Fauci made science into a religion by saying you have to trust the science, and thus thereby losing the principle of science being this thing where you test hypotheses. And also, we've got the lights in the sky. So obviously, our corrupt society is running up against the iceberg, I guess, of Neoplatonism. And I'm sure that's happened in other iterations, in the past. So, I guess that's just what happens. The idea of science, of testing hypotheses, at some point, gets corrupted when society gets corrupted. And obviously, that's it becomes like a tangled knot that has to get untangled, right?
Yeah, it's not just that. It's not just that science was converted into a faith by Fauci, in 2020, which it certainly was. But I think science had a fundamental problem built into it. It reflects the way capitalism has this ticking stopwatch built into it, where too much technology means you don't really obviates workers, and now you have a problem. Workers can't negotiate for enough wages to buy the products that they're building, and now you have a ticking time bomb. And I think that the problem is that science assumes that the 4D matrix we live inside is objective, and that it is, in other words, it uses the idea of an objective observer as a first principle. But if the observer actually is creating reality, and it just as much as reality is creating the observer, then having an objective observer as a first principle no longer makes sense. And now you've stacked the whole Jenga tower of science on top of this one faulty, Jenga log. And I think that this all blew up in their faces in the 1920s or 30s, whenever quantum mechanics started to become a thing. And they don't know how to think about it. And this really brings me back to the top of the pod where you were saying my job is completely meaningless. David Graeber has a whole book about this called Bullshit Jobs that I really have to get to and read. His theory is that almost all jobs, the people who do them feel that they don't really need to be done, and it's just busy work. And at this point, it's just a jobs program just to keep civilization running. And you seem to feel somewhat that way, right? Your job is your job completely pointless? Is it Is it just underwhelming for you personally? Is it a job that needs to be done?
Well, it's more like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon kind of problem.
So it's just a Sisyphean task.
Yeah, that's it.
Just completely beyond the pale.
So are you saying that objective reality... I don't think that objective reality is like a terrible flaw, or it's not a bad... I mean, I feel like at some point I had like an awakening to like objective reality that... Well, there was the reality in my head, and then at some point I realized, like, philosophically, that there was like the truth outside of that.
Yeah,
and it has to do with like your feelings about God and whatnot.
Yeah. Yes, that's the key insight, right? It's not that there's not an objective reality. It's just that this ain't it, and you have to realize you're living in a matrix of your own creation, of a collective creation, and that is not. Do not mistake that for reality. It's not the bottom level.
I mean, I just don't know. You're saying it's like a flaw in science that they suppose an objective reality more than a collectively manufactured reality. And I don't know that... I mean, it's like a flaw in the conclusion of science, of what science is at right now, possibly. But in terms of the fundamental idea of coming up with hypotheses and testing them, I don't know that... I mean, that's not really like a problem with fundamental to science, right?
I think it is fundamental, right? Like, the idea is that if I could perform an experiment today, if I perform an experiment now in 2024, and you perform it on the other side of the world next year, you should have the exact same result. But if we're not performing the experiments in objective reality, and instead we're performing it inside of a collectively mediated matrix of some kind, then the fact that we got the same results does not mean that we're getting at bedrock reality or at objective reality, because there is another degree of freedom between us and objective reality that we're not seeing. We're making a mistake. We're making a fundamental mistake about in assuming that what we're testing is bedrock reality, and it's not. It's one degree removed, and the observer is that degree of freedom in between those two. So I think it is. Now, I don't know. It's a little touchy. Like, the exact definition of science is a little iffy, right? So I'm not sure if we have to throw all of science out with the bathwater. It sure is a neat trick for getting things done within the matrix. And I do think that science is this source of, or at least science in the guise of technology is this important source of novelty, which is the true currency of the universe. So I don't know. I guess I don't want to say I totally disagree with you, I suppose. But I think that something is jacked up in science. But the way that I would connect this back to your situation at your job is, I think that a great many people exist in your situation. And if scientists came out and said, okay, so scientists, they're not like the people living in the trailer parks, right? They have a somewhat, privileged, they should have a much more privileged position in society than they do. Let's put it that way. But if they make the announcement that this reality is subjective, right? A lot of people in your situation are just going to stop going to work, and that's going to mean that the whole system comes crumbling down, right? They need us all to wake up and go to work in the morning. The minute we stop is the minute that the system crumbles, right? That is the revolution. And so I think that the scientists have stumbled on this reality, this truth, this Platonic truth, but they can't tell us. And so because they have to kind of string us along now and can't be honest with us, their whole apparatus has turned into a con game of some kind. And I think that, amazingly, a plague came around to expose that fact about the ruling regime once again during COVID, just as it did during the Middle Ages with the Black Death. But I think that there is a relationship between the Platonistic nature of reality, the untenability of your job, and the desire of people who inhabit the more privileged echelons of our economic pyramid to stay in those privileged echelons and try to prevent the shuffling of the deck that is a revolution.
Well, I think the subjectivity of reality is like a little important, but mostly not important, I guess, is my feeling.
Well, why do you say that?
Well, I mean, like the Pythagorean theorem, right? I mean, it's not going to be a matter of subjectivity, right?
Yes, but the Pythagorean theorem is an example of the realm of ideas, which I think is the true. Like the Pythagorean theorem, like exists in the realm of ideas, and all the triangles in existence are like a reflection of some higher order ideal. So I feel like the Pythagorean theorem does not exist in where I close my fist. The Pythagorean theorem exists where I make the decision to close my fist. Right, these two worlds. Do you disagree? I could be convinced maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I guess I would place the Pythagorean theorem in the realm of ideas, which I think is more close to objective reality.
Well, how is it helpful to think about your world as subjective?
Well, it's helpful in this sense. It's when you understand that your personality, your ego, your conception of yourself is nothing but a costume that you can wear. Right? There is that extra degree of freedom between what you're observing and then bedrock reality. That is subjectivity. There's a mirror degree of freedom when you realize that you, Brian, or me, Nate, are not. These are just costumes we're wearing, and costumes that will eventually will collapse like Obi-Wan Kenobi's robe when we die and just be left like a empty skin. But nonetheless, it's like we feel this like anchor to our future selves and our past selves, but you got to realize the future and the past selves are just mental models. There's nothing real about them. And your past self is going to be badly misremembered and mostly forgotten. And your future self is a prognostication that almost never comes true and is entirely made up. And the future is so unpredictable that you're never really the person you forecast yourself to become. And so really, it's just you and it has a way of separating the wheat from the chaff in that sense.
Well, I mean, the problems of science that you were talking about before, I mean, the problem with Fauci saying trust the science is that, like, we have to accept crazy lockdowns and forced vaccinations that probably aren't needed. And I don't know, that seems like not really like a Platonic problem. I mean, if you just think about things like, if you were to accept like the objective truth models, like, reality, it's a problem within the objective truth model. It doesn't like touch the Platonism problem, right?
Yeah, it's a problem with the objective truth model.
Like, that's just like a problem of like corruption that just doesn't really have anything to do with with Platonism, right?
Yeah, in so many ways, like the ideal of science has been polluted by commerce, like to sell shots in this. Yeah, so I would agree. This is right. My contention is merely that scientists have become charlatans, and that you're right. The problems with the COVID regime, it exposed their fraud, but you're right. That does not come into contact with the fundamental problem at the heart of science. I'm just saying that they've all become shysters because they had to, because they can't let us all know that going to work is an exercise in futility and all made up, and not real.
Back to like in the plague and then the Renaissance, how did they take advantage of Platonism? That's what they did, right?
Yeah.
There was a renaissance of Platonism. And so they obviously weren't doing double slit experiments.
No.
How did they use it to improve their society?
Well, I think that the concept of Platonism is most obvious in most obvious evidence in the Italian Renaissance. It wasn't just a revival of like Greek art, Greco-Roman art and art techniques, right? This was a way of trying to pull things through the keyhole, right? The same keyhole, like I make a decision to close my fist, and then on the other side of the keyhole, my fist actually closes, right? So the idea here is to bring concepts through that veil, from this realm of ideas to reality, right? This is why Michelangelo's David is so exquisite. It's like you look at it and it looks exactly like a dude. Like the stone looks like living flesh. And it's like, wow, Michelangelo has taken an idea and translated it through the restrictor valve, through the keyhole, into reality where we can all see it with almost perfect fidelity, right? The quality of the art, and it's because it's what happens when you free people from having to subsistence farm, right? That's what the big deal was in Florence. You started to have a wealth surplus, and so you could have a division of labor, and so the Medicis could just pay people to be artists for decades and just study Greco-Roman art techniques, like guys like Michelangelo and Botticelli. And so what the Italian Renaissance really is this exquisite expression of the Platonistic ideals. There's a reason Raphael painted the School of Athens with Plato at the middle of it, with his finger pointed towards the sky to indicate the supremacy of the realm of ideas, and Aristotle walking next to him with his hand held flat, indicating the supremacy of the material realm that's measurable. The church had almost somewhat arbitrarily taken the Aristotelian side. Aristotle also had this model of the solar system where the Earth was at the center of it, so that's like you could call it the geocentric or the Aristotelian model of the solar system. And so the church was doubling down on this at the time that like both art and science were exposing them. Magic is what eventually became science, right? In like in the 1700s, you still have Isaac Newton calling himself both a scientist and an alchemist, and he inventing calculus and the equations for gravitation. So you had like magic and the Italian Renaissance, like with a pincer movement, a double hammer blow on the authority of the Vatican, which had collapsed in the wake of the Black Death. So you asked, how is Platonism making its head known in medieval Europe, or late medieval Europe / transition to modern Europe? That's the answer. It had a profoundly transformative effect on their society. And I suspect it's going to have a profoundly transformative effect on our society in the very near future. I think there's room here to start thinking about, okay, so why are we all seeing lights in the sky now? Why are mushrooms and LSD and psychedelics suddenly re-entering society? They certainly didn't during the Renaissance. But psychedelics were a part of the menu when Platonism brought down the Roman Empire. There's a whole rabbit hole to go down with the cults of Dionysus and Eleusis and their parallels in Christianity. So that's what jumps to mind when you say, what did Platonism, how did Platonism manifest itself in the late Middle Ages? Well, I would say the Italian Renaissance. Nothing less than the Italian Renaissance is the answer to that question. And that was a big deal. That was a huge big deal at the time.
How did it change their political system?
It was really the Black Death that changed the political system, not so much Platonism. Black Death wiped out half the peasants, and the peasants they suddenly realized that instead of swearing fealty to their feudal lord, they could play one lord off the other in a bidding war for their services. Half the fields are not getting planted with crops, and so the peasants found out that they could kind of, rather than swear fealty, they could they could rent their labor out to the highest bidder, and bingo bango, they're suddenly not peasants, they're suddenly employees, and suddenly this was violently suppressed. In England there were laws passed to try to suppress the wages that the lords were having to pay out. Right, these were people used to giving orders. They did not take orders well. And so after a whole bunch of violence and a 100 Years' War and a 30 Years' War, eventually the bankers take over in the aftermath of the 30 Years' War. And the modern era begins, and the Industrial Revolution starts on the continent in earnest, and, the rest is history. But yeah, I would say it was really the Black Death that was fundamental in the transition from the system of lords and peasants to the system of employees and employers. And there were plagues that definitely were preludes to the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, and the guise of the Appian and Justinian plagues. But I don't think that they were. But it was really debt and the sanctity of debt, the sanctity of private property, Roman legal system, I think, that caused the political change from slave Rome to peasant Europe of the Middle Ages. But so you're saying again that the political system changed, but it wasn't really because of Platonism directly. Platonism was more of a way for the Medicis to gain prestige and to get away with imbuing their artwork with pagan pre-Christian themes, which was forbidden up until that time. So so Platonism was the background, but I wouldn't say it was the direct cause to the transition from the late medieval period to the modern era.
So does that mean we shouldn't expect any political change from Platonism in our current era? Maybe not, but maybe so. I think that if psychedelics, if the people of the late Middle Ages had gotten psychedelics, maybe things would have happened a lot faster than they did. Certainly, when they stumbled upon psychedelics, the results were insane, like the Anabaptist Revolt of Munster or the Salem witch trials here in the New World of the 17th century. Certainly, when psychedelics had profound impacts on it, but not in the organized philosophic way that psychedelics were consumed in the Greco-Roman world at Eleusis and in the ecstatic cults of Dionysus, and not in the sort of academic way in which psychedelics are currently being studied or have recently been studied at NYU and Johns Hopkins by the likes of Dr. Roland Griffiths, for example. So I don't know. I mean, this is really this is the most exciting topic of all that you're bringing up here. What's it all going to look like when it all shakes out?
because reality is like shifting under our actual conception of reality is shifting under our feet, and that's just always a crazy time. Kind of like when Galileo looked through his telescope, or Copernicus wrote up his calculations proving that the Earth orbits the sun and not vice versa. Right? An illusion was shattered. Like the very reality people thought they were living in was totally, what changed in a really short amount of time, and that's what's about to happen. And it's going to be wild because it always is. So I look forward mightily to that. But I wonder what you think, Brian. You got any? I mean, I think that this time around, Platonism is definitely going to be a part of changing the political system, just because the reintroduction of psychedelics into our culture in the early. I mean, the effects of think about the Beatles or Steve Jobs, who admitted that LSD was a big part of his career and revolutionizing computing, like the computer revolution or the music revolution. We had a massive explosion of art in the '60s that had its analog in the Italian Renaissance, no, and it's all because of LSD, right? It's because the Beatles went to study under the Maharishi in India or whatever that episode was.
Well, I mean, realization is like the name of the game, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think that's exactly what I'm trying to say, but in much more condensed.
I mean, I guess science doesn't really answer the question of realization. I mean, it's just a way to test truths, and so I can see. I mean, what do you say about when there's just a bunch of data, but then all of a sudden you know what it means, and then you can see the pattern behind it,
like the Matrix, right? Like literally, the green numbers falling down the screen. If you look at that and see, blonde woman wearing red dress.
So I guess ideally, we would see the lights in the sky and realize what it means, right?
Yeah.
I guess working some crazy job and being at your wit's end all the time and strung out for various reasons is an obstacle to realization.
Yeah, definitely.
It's hard to see what's going on. Yeah, all right. Well, I don't know what it is we're going to realize. Hopefully it's, something.
Yeah. Well, I think it definitely will be. Yeah, I don't exactly know what it's going to look like either. But it is just a very interesting time to be alive with things changing so fast. It's so hard to guess what's going to happen, but I just sense that maybe everyone senses this at all times and places, but I have this sense of climax, like at the end of a symphony or the end of a movie we're marching towards. I wonder what that is exactly. There's no question that things are speeding up exponentially. Like if you were a 12th century French farmer, you might see one new innovation, maybe a different shaped plow handle, your entire life. But we're old enough to remember before the advent of the iPhone, and that has just changed everything in 15 short years.
It seems like what would be nice is to do meaningful work and have a family and a secure place to stay. But is there some broader meaning to human existence beyond having your basic needs met?
I do think that if you conceptualize time as a physical dimension, just swap it from something you measure with a stopwatch to something you measure with a ruler, or you're sitting in a concert hall listening to a symphony, instead of listening to each being trapped in the time signature with the rest of the audience, you just read the sheet music instead, where you can see the whole symphony at once. Once you do that for your own life, you realize that, and once you realize that your individuality is merely an illusion, and that it's like a wave washing up on shore, right? The wave exists as a phenomenon, but it's made of water, just like the wave before it and after it. The same water, right? It's just energy propagating through matter, and that the wave's temporary existence as an individual wave is an illusion masking the reality that you're just looking at the same water with energy propagating through it. If you see yourself that way, suddenly, in much the way that your youth spreads out behind you and your future spreads out ahead of you, if you swap that time signature, swap that temporal dimension, then suddenly your ancestors spread out behind you and your descendants spread out in front of you, and the stock market chart of human existence, where novelty increases over time, or it seems like well-being over time increases over time, or the ego recedes over time. We get more democratic systems of control over time. not less democratic systems, political systems. The next political system is going to have we're going to be trading a big set of problems for hopefully a slightly smaller set of problems, and then there'll be another one after that. But there is like a trajectory, right? There is a shape to our stock market chart. There's like a shape to our symphony. It seems like we're accelerating towards this point, like a marble rolling into like you put a marble into a bowl, it's going to eventually settle at the center. It feels like something like that is happening to me anyway. But maybe that's just an illusion. Maybe everyone thinks that in all times and places. I don't know, but I don't think so. I think that lights in the sky and psychedelics and madness and all of our institutions exposing their rot and corruption, and the emperor having no clothes. And oh, by the way, we haven't even talked about AI yet. Like all of these things are like swirling in a huge some kind of a pattern, and I don't know. It's hard to see where it's extrapolated out to where it's all going, but it certainly doesn't seem like cyclical. It seems like we're going from some point A to some point B.
Well, I think you have to think about how what you're doing affects your relationship to yourself, and I guess you do want to be like Obi-Wan Kenobi and not associate too much with your corporeal form.
Yeah.
And there's just some things that are poison to that, like the way people tend to relate to social media being obviously one of them, eating low-quality food, I don't know, drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, pornography's on the internet, the worst.
I mean, maybe drugs and alcohol help you see through the void in some ways.
Well, alcohol is like a drug. I'm just going to call it all. It's all like drugs, right? And different drugs do wildly different things.
I don't know why alcohol gets like a special designation.
So, is one interesting drug. It's a good one for facilitating hookups and things. I love that aspect about alcohol. Also good for like listening to music, but not as good as the more visionary drugs like a couple of J-Bones really improve your Pink Floyd listening experience more than a couple of beers will, I reckon. Not that a couple of beers won't, but I don't know. I feel like different drugs are good for different things. It all depends on what you need. What kind of prostheses would most benefit you?
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's probably an okay place to wrap it up, eh?
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. We'll wish all of our listeners a wonderful week. And as always, at this moment, I encourage our listeners to send us an email at nop@substack.com and let us know what you think about the fate of humankind and the grand trajectory of the human story. Or let us know why we're completely insane and off the mark. And if you want to read some exciting essays about the falls of Rome or magic and the Renaissance or banking or any of these things, do I head on over to nop.substack.com and check out some essays there. We will see you all next week. Have a good one.
All right, we'll see you.